Thank you, everybody, for being here. We know it was perhaps a challenge to decide to come, and we made the decision because of the incredible beauty and warmth and human depth of this film. We have an amazing panel who has agreed to kind of engage with this film, but because of the way in which it last Simchat Torah transformed our space, I am really, as the moderator, going to let our individuals speak. I'm going to introduce them. I just want to say, in beginning, I am Rabbi Steve Greenberg, one of the founding directors of Eshel. And this film is being carried across the country. We're helping to do that in places all over the U.S. because it is the first film that depicts the overlap of queer and religious identity that isn't dark, that isn't sad, that isn't tragic. It's beautiful and poignant and touching and funny, and it's life-centered. And so I guess with the notion that we are a people who have been commanded to, but in the very moment of our being, to choose life. Indeed, we are continuing to do that as we speak here and there. And I'd like to just remind everybody that this film is the product of lots of really talented people in Israel, among them Avigail Sperber, who is the daughter of Rabbi Daniel Sperber, who has really kind of like broken into the movie area with her incredible spirit, and Moran Nakar, who is the director. The individuals in the film, you'll hear them referred to, are incredible people. And I'm going to begin with our first panelist, who knows some of the characters in the film. So I'm going to introduce them sequentially. To my left is Yocheved Lindenbaum, a Jewish educator and a chaplain and a mother of 5 kids, and among them a gay son. She has become an active member of the Eshel Parent Leadership Group, and she currently lives in both Yerushalayim and Riverdale. Yocheved. So,
hi.
Yeah. Well, if you want a question, I can give you a question. I guess the first question is, what did this film raise in you? What did it make you feel? And how does it reflect upon your own experience as a mother of a gay man?
Well, it kind of jumped over the first 5 years of darkness and crying to the next part. But okay. So I have 5 kids. My youngest son, his name is Yitzi. He's 27, and he is gay. He told us, my husband's in the audience, he told us when he was, I believe, 16. I think he was a junior in high school. And and let me also say that this kid has been mitsuyan. He's been excellent in everything since he was in kindergarten. That one Rebbe would tell the next Rebbe, oh, if you have Lindenbaum in your class, you better make sure you come to school prepared every single day. And he was won the award for whatever in elementary school. He was valedictorian in his high school class. And he went on to learn yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. And so he's telling us he's a junior in high school, and I really had no clue. I don't know why, but I had no clue. For whatever reason, Hashem kind of was in my brain, and I looked at him and I said, you are exactly the person today that you were yesterday. And I got up and I gave him a big hug. And then I cried for about 8 weeks. My son asked the son above him, is Ima ever going to stop crying? And I realize now, in retrospect, that one of the reasons he said that is because we would be together mostly Shabbat, and we would sing, and I would start crying, and you can't sing and cry at the same time. So there I would be a puddle, and I was a puddle for several reasons, and maybe some of this is still hard for me. It's partially, I guess, I I had this picture of what my family was going to look like, that we would even out, that having 4 sons and 1 daughter, I would then have an even number sex-wise, and they would be, I thought of it in dance. I saw them like as couples in dance. And now what was going to be? That was one thing. I also knew right away, I said, if this is a choice, then my son is an idiot. And my son is not an idiot, so it's clearly not a choice, which was something I sort of believed beforehand, but this really kind of drove it home for me. And I'm trying to think where to go with this. And I would say the next few years were really very difficult as I came to terms with who he was going to be and what he was not going to be. And I think one of the things that upset me the most was knowing that the Orthodox community, which, if he had a wife by his side, would be running after him to give lectures and to sing, to do tefillah and to write papers and to donate money and all these other good things. Now he would be michutz lamachane, outside of the camp. And I feel for the Jewish people, because this young man has so much to give, and none of you are going to get it. I mean, you might, but the world at large won't get it. And he has found his places. He has found his places to teach Torah. He's actually, as we speak, he's in Germany at a mathematics conference, exactly where I would want to be right now. I also wanted to tell you that the Elik and Adam, I know Elik literally from before he was born. I met his grandmother when I was 9, and she was the next door neighbor of my sister. I called her yesterday, and I said to her, is there any message that you would want me to give everybody? And she said, it's zema'ot pashut, it's very easy. Hu haneched sheli. He is my grandson. She said that about 5 times. And then she said, one time a relative came over to her and she said, Ma'im ha'olam haba shelo, what about his lot in the next world? So her answer was like, what do I have to do with his olam haba? Right? She said, well, and she said, at his bar mitzvah, his father made a bracha, Baruch Sheptarani, and okay, hu haneched sheli. And I try to be in that same space.
Part of what this film is doing is highlighting how relationship trumps all kinds of other resistances in the culture. And among the most, I think, moving characters, I don't know, I thought was the mother of Ben Nun and Aviel. I think it was Ben Nun's mother. And the process of parents transforming themselves in the midst of their love of and acceptance of their kid is really actually happening all over. And part of the work Eshel does is gathering parents to support each other in a national retreat and allowing parents to become the strongest voice in the Orthodox community for Orthodox synagogues and schools to do better than they're doing. In a way, and we're going to get to this later, is that what this film is about how life is moving forward from in a grassroots fashion to transform the Orthodox community. And in light of that, I'm going to go to the end of the panel and introduce bracha. Part of the real challenge is that the moment you discover you're gay in the Orthodox world, you are standing at the edge of a cliff with no future, because no one has given you a reasonable future. They don't describe any way you can actually manage or imagine what your future would look like, because all futures in the Orthodox community are straight. The challenge is, what do you do with that experience of standing at the edge of a cliff? And Bracha has a story to tell about her journey in just that way. Bracha is a wife, a mother, a lawyer, a facilitator of Eshel's weekly support group for LGBTQ women, and she grew up in a Haredi home, attended Beis Yaakov schools, and now lives in Teaneck with her wife, Daniela, and their 3 beautiful children.
Hi, everyone. So this film was really beautiful, and it made me reflect on a number of parts of my experience, but one thing that I wanted to touch on specifically was I was raised to have a very strong connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that it belonged to me. My parents were very keen on all of their children, feeling that, creating their own relationship. And when the time came when I figured out that I was gay, it took me a while, after having shidduch dated for quite a number of years, when I finally figured out why it wasn't working and met my wife, that cliff that you described, Rabbi Greenberg, about how to move forward and, live a life with my wife, build a life with her, and then also maintain my connection to Judaism and practice it the way that I want to. Because of the way that I was raised, it wasn't an issue for me. I was going to do both. Just possibly naively so. I was young, and I thought I, could do anything. But I was certain of it, and I married somebody who felt the same way. And through many trials and tribulations, including essentially the loss of my family, we have built this magnificent life together. We're both Orthodox. We live in an Orthodox community. We go to an Orthodox shul. Our children are in yeshiva day school. I lead Shabbos groups at my shul for one of the kids, for two of my children's age group. They're close in age. They're 4 and 5, so they're in the same group. And we have somehow found a way, and without a doubt, through the help of organizations, specifically Eshel, and community that we've built and found, and family that we've created, we found a way to really do both. And yeah, it's been, thank God, looking back, it's been the journey, but we're here.
You probably all have, how many in this room have been invited to a gay wedding in the past 3 years? Raise your hand. Right, okay, good. So part of what is actually new is that it used to be that if you were Orthodox and gay, you either were silent and stayed and married somebody against your will that you shouldn't have married, or stayed single and hid, or you left and you said goodbye to the tradition and often to family members. What is emerging is something quite different, and it's really actually rather recent. It's like barely a decade, I would say, old. And we have, at this moment, it's really, it would be impossible to not kind of touch upon this, is that our next two panelists are from Israel. They're Israeli and spent and lived in various ways in Israel for much of their lives. And I offered them the opportunity to beg out of this moment. And they decided to come because of the life-centeredness of this gathering, the fact that we need to be here with each other at this moment more than anything else, and their willingness to entertain the possibility that what they have to contribute is really descriptive of a vitality of Israeli society that we really need to celebrate now. So I want to introduce Ben Katz. He's an Israeli psychologist who works, he's doing his doctoral studies here at Stony, huh? Your postdoc, right, at Stony Brook University. He has worked for years with Shoval, a project that supports LGBT plus Orthodox adolescents in Israeli schools. Ben.
Hi, everybody. So I want to talk about a couple of things. First, I just want to tell you a little bit more about Shoval. It stands for Shakol Barali Chvodo, always made in his honor. We personally, the way that we support those adolescents is indirectly. There's other organizations that do a lot of really good youth movement work. We really take the institutional approach. So we're the ones who go from community to community, school to school, clinic to clinic, and we provide professional trainings in order to bring up this conversation in all the different religious environments, train them to be more effective, and very often with very positive results. It's no secret among the people on the panel that all week I've been going back and forth over whether I was emotionally ready for it or not, and things like that. And the truth is, part of what really convinced me was when I was chatting with Orit about it. She was like, but Ben, these are your friends. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a whole film, this, that, and the other. She's like, no, Ben, it's literally your friends. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, go to YouTube. And I was like, oh my God. This was the thing that they all posted to Facebook as it was happening. I didn't realize this was literally our local community. And I'm really glad for the opportunity to kind of represent what feels like my community. And, you know, I hope with all of you kind of experience the stakes that they're feeling right now. What I want to talk about for a little bit is just why I think we at Shoval have been so effective. At this point, obviously not right now, but even through the pandemic, we've been having more than one activity per week in any kind of religious establishment that you could think of. Those of you that know Israeli politics, at this point we've been to every yeshuv in the Gush, we've been down to Yerucham, we've been up in the Galil, we've been to Tveria, we've been to Modi'in Illit. We're hitting all of them. And I think the two things that we do that are extremely effective are, first of all, we try and find the better angels of any community. Okay, most people in most communities are good people. Okay, most people in our communities are great people. But then there's going to be all sorts of constraints, right, that might prevent them from wanting to actually take a stand on this kind of thing. So part of what we do in order to intervene better is find the levers of power of any place that we're going to be working. Okay, an alumnus of a school is going to be a much more powerful representative than a random one of us. But even more powerful than an alumnus, and even more powerful than a donor, is the parent. That's right. There is no force of change that we have found that is stronger in a given community than a parent who's mad that their kid doesn't get to go to that school. I've been in a lot of different groups, and I've been in a lot of different communities. Nobody's as powerful as a parent, and nobody is as effective. Right? Because a school administrator is going to be worried, well, what's going to happen? Parents, they're going to call, they're going to make trouble. Well, I'm a parent, and I'm making trouble. Right? And all of a sudden, that changes the game. And then once we actually get in there, we have the professional training part, but we also have the first-person story part. And that actually looks exactly like these films that you've seen, and it blows people's minds. Okay? Once upon a time, when I was still much more outwardly religious with the kippah and the tzitzit and things like that, and I would tell my story, I would always get two questions that were always the first questions that I would get. The first question would always be, any guesses? What about the pasuk? It says that you're not allowed to. How are you supposed to deal with that verse? Okay. The second question is always, something seems fake, you are too happy. And people truly couldn't comprehend for years and years and years the concept of somebody being outwardly gay with a kippah and actually happy. And part of what we did over the course of time, some of it going school to school, some of it with some of our partners, putting out videos like these, getting our stories out there. Because part of what was so surprising, I think, for people was that they expected us to be, these kind of the way we're portrayed, let's just say, right? Barely holding it together. They're okay at this point with you being religious and gay as long as you're brave, right? What if we didn't want to be brave and we actually just wanted to have a good time, which was most of us and we're actually pretty interesting, right? And that was such a big shift for people, and especially teachers, let's say, and parents, right? When their kid comes out of the closet, instead of thinking red sirens, red flag, we are in trouble, we need to do everything that we can to stop this because this kid is in trouble, desperate times call for desperate measures, let's do desperate things, right? These are good people who may be pushing these kids to do desperate things. Instead, we could be a real life face, a smiling face, and say, don't worry, your kid actually does have a future, right? That cliff that kid himself is kind of facing and that you are seeing for them, don't worry, they're past by now. There's ways to move forward. And, the last thing that I'll say is just, I'm also really glad that the portrayal here, it wasn't just positive, but it was special. I know from my Jerusalem community, we're subversive, we're wild. We will have drag shows in the Old City, with categories like B'nai Akiva realness. It is truly amazing. And also, all this talk of are our parents better, our parents worse, our parents better. The fact is we are strengthened to be better parents because we fight hard for every one of our children, and we know what it's like to have to face your parents' expectations and overcome them. And so when we ourselves become parents, you see in these people's interactions with their kids, 90% of the time it's the same as every other parent, but then there's that extra 10% where we're not working against the fact that these are same-sex parents, it's working for them, right? And kind of those are the stories that we're trying to get out there. And I think as soon as they're told and people come in contact with them, they're not the kind of stories that are easy to forget. So, I'm just really glad that there was a space for us to kind of sit with that.
Wow. That parents can make the biggest difference is what we've experienced too in our work. And that you talk about happiness, I've got Brazilian family who, when I came to Brazil the second time, the first time they didn't know, and I didn't really know and couldn't tell them, this is Holocaust family. And the second time I came with a film, Trembling Before God, and they said, we can't have you because you're happy. And I said, what does that mean? They said, if you were sad you were gay, you could come visit us. But if you're happy that you're gay, then you're a heretic and you do not belong in our home. There's something about our saying we are going to stay committed to this tradition. We're going to ask our families to accompany us, and we're going to be happy. Changes the entire portrayal of the experience. And I want to say that there's one other thing to introduce Orit. What was missing in this film is really interesting. There was if you saw the Moel had a yarmulke, was religious, but what wasn't he? A rabbi. There were other people in the film who were doing things that were ritual in various ways. There are no rabbis in this film, which means to say that while we do need to engage rabbis and to engage them with our experience, our discovery over the past 13 years with Eshel is that rabbis need our help from the grassroots in order to move, because often they themselves are limited by their own communities, and the grassroots movements are what's actually moving things. And with that, I want to introduce Orit. Orit is an incredible academic, a professor of sociology, and the author of a new book, Queer Judaism, LGBT Activism, and the Remaking of Jewish Orthodoxy. The book examines more than 15 years of LGBTQ Orthodox Jews community building in Israel. Orit.
Right, thank you. So first of all, just to be sitting on this panel, like two of my heroes. Sorry, I didn't know you before, but you represent the other heroes that I met. But Ben, I met while doing the research, and Steve. You're legend with Trembling and the other work. So let's see. I was going to say three things, but I'll start with what you said about the rabbis. So one of the chapters in my book, the halachic chapters. And let me just say, for the book, I'm an outsider to the community. I did not grow up Orthodox. I do not identify as LGBT. I came to this kind of naively as a sociologist. who works with Orthodox Jewish communities. And I interviewed many activists like Ben, and many people who identify as Orthodox and LGBT kind of on both spectrum. And then I looked at various activist initiatives, et cetera. One of the chapters for my book is called Educating Our Rabbis. That's sort of the chapter title, which makes sense to activists, right? Because that's what you did. And when I was finishing up the book, I sent it around, and some of the readers came back and said, "What do you mean educating the rabbis? Like, that's almost heretic." I said, "But no. This is actually what is going on. This is what the activists do. They don't just engage the rabbis." So sort of this was the last point I was going to make, but I will start with that. I think one of the beautiful messages of the film, which really represents what I saw happening in Israel, and I'm sure that many of you, as you described sort of your own sort of practices and community, is not just engaging the communities and not just telling them, right, as Ben was describing Shoval, but changing them from the grassroots, from the ground up, from acts like, the parents and people who engage the communities. And that's one of the things I think that was captured in the film. So it's not just that the rabbis were missing. It's that people from the ground up, right, in a very Jewish way, were remaking the story, right? How are you going to write the wedding vows, right? How is that going to look, right? It's going to have a chuppah, right? So a very, very creative and joyous, right, element to this. And several other things that I wanted to point out. One is the mendacity, right? I mean, sometimes the stories, right, of religion and engaging with religion as LGBTQ, right? It's not just heavy and sad. It's also like momentous. And Elik in the film, this is the couple with the 3 children, and he's all over Facebook. He's written blogs. He's really an incredible human being. One of his messages is always, "It's really, really boring," And and his message. I mean, he's a brilliant writer, right? So he's not boring at all. But his whole thing is like, look at the pictures of the kids. We went to the beach. They messed up the floor. And, right, but that comes across so beautifully. It's, on the one hand, like, obviously groundbreaking, right? And making communities kind of think with you, but also kind of not, right? And I think that was sort of a message that the film really captured beautifully. The other, right, and Steve, I mean, it's like the queer joy, and we've talked about that, right? When Trampoline came out, that was not, that couldn't be the message, right? That couldn't be the message. And here, it's not just the mendacity, but just the joy. And that is kind of the message. And from my perspective as a sociologist, as like someone who studies sort of political change making, right? As Ben was talking about, right? So Daniel and is it Omri, right? The first, the young couple in the first, right? And one of them says, I don't want to be a political billboard or something like that, right? And I'm like, no, this is all politics. Yes, I mean, it's a film and it's a docuseries, right? And they won awards and it's an artistic endeavor, but it's very political, right? And it's very much in line with a lot of the really brilliant public campaigns that Shoval and other activist organizations have produced. I mean, I think Elik and Adam, I think they appeared in each one of these iterations. There were kind of various video clips, and there were a couple of campaigns called Apanim Shelanu, Our Faces, where they sort of still photographs and kind of a message that came from each of the participants. So it's a brilliant change-making kind of artistic piece. So, yeah.
Thank you. We're gonna. I think we have time for just a few questions from you all. So anything you would like to ask our panelists, we have a microphone, and if you raise your hand, we'll bring it to you.
First of all, I just wanted to say I love the film. And I was...
What's your name? Can you start?
Val.
Val.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I was lucky because I came out about 40 years ago, and my parents were totally supportive and wonderful. And I think I was really unusual among my friends group to have that experience. But the question I wanted to ask is, was there a disagreement among the makers of the film whether to include or leave out the trans man who was pregnant?
Well, I don't think so. I think that they really intended this to include LGBTQ, like, you know, the whole picture of the I would say the contemporary political frame and the contemporary emotional frame of the queer community is that everybody needs to be represented. However, what you're saying is what happens when Orthodox communities watch this film. So the typical response I get from Orthodox families is that it's harder for them to watch the trans sections. But that is not, I mean, that is actually true. I think it's the next big challenge. And in many Orthodox communities, there's already movement on the L and the G issue. And I think that it's a really important, statement that the producers decided to include as much of the picture as they could.
Here we have a microphone.
Sorry. Thanks. Helene Abramson. I also thought the film was beautifully done, and I would love to either be friends with or adopt everyone that was portrayed in the film. Yes. They were just so full of life, so adorable. I guess my question is the fact that this was made in Israel, and it seems like they are very far ahead of at least the Orthodox communities that I'm familiar with. How do you account for that? I don't see the American Orthodox communities being quite as, I don't know, maybe it's easier for the kids to move out of Orthodoxy here. I would be curious as to why you think it's so much more significant and so much further ahead.
I'll let our Israelis respond.
Yeah, I'm from New Jersey, right? TNEC, TABC, YU, Hakotel, Hebrew U, Israel, So, having been in both worlds and chatted plenty with especially my Israeli friends about it, they love asking, where is it easier, Israel or America? They assume America. And what I've actually found to be pretty consistently true is that in America, it is much easier for kids to move to the big cities, stop being religious, and then come out. Right? That is a script that many parents are familiar with. What parents here seem to be less familiar with, not zero, certainly not anymore, but in Israel they're much more familiar with, is them going to yeshiva, going to Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, which is only a 45-minute drive from home, coming out, and then still coming back home. Because Israel is smaller, because it's more family-oriented, because it's frankly more religious and Jews are the population, there's just a much larger critical mass of people who are willing to stay religious and then go back home. Now that's very helpful for us and Shoval and things like that. Obviously, as was pointed out, not everybody from every demographic is in a hurry to get represented in public, which of course we respect, but as activists we have to figure out how to navigate that. But I do think that just because of all of these aspects of Israeli society, you have a lot more people that are a lot more willing to go back home, and therefore a lot more changes happened on the home front. I think just descriptively speaking, sometimes there are wonderful queer couples setting up their lives in Teaneck, but I think more recent than Israelis.
I think it might be more recent as well, but I would add that in addition to my family, I know of 4 other queer families in Teaneck with children, and we all go to different shuls. There isn't one, and everyone's Orthodox, and there isn't one, there's some communities, everyone's like, oh, that's the shul that the gay people can go to, right? Like there's only one shul that like might let them in. My experience has been so different. And while Teaneck is, without a doubt, more modern Orthodox than I was raised, every single shul, I shouldn't say every single, but all of the queer families that I know and the shuls that they go to all fall somewhere and anywhere on the Orthodox and religious observance spectrum. And there seems to be room for everyone. But I do think you're right. I do think this is new. I've met a number of people who have said to me, 10 years ago, this wouldn't have happened.
So I have a little bit of a different perspective, and I'm sorry that I'm going to be the downer here. So first of all, I raised my children in Teaneck. I thought it was very funny that 3 of us, my husband and I moved out of Teaneck after 30 years of living there. And as one of my Teaneck friends says, tell me the street and I'll tell you who the gay kid is on the street. But with the exception maybe of the rabbi of the shul that you go to, none of the rabbis are really willing to be communally involved here. None of them, they're willing to embrace one-on-one, but not communally. And I had a conversation with one of them, and I asked him some questions. Could a gay person do this in our shul? And he said, yeah, of course, why not? It just hasn't come up. And we had I had 5 of those. And I said, why do you think it hasn't come up? And he just went, huh. And Yitzi had been his student, and he said, I just wish you would have told me because maybe I could have helped. And I just said, what would that help have looked like? And I said, would he have been valedictorian had you known that he was, it was just, so there's a little bit of a, and Teaneck is a more open community on many levels in terms of orthodoxy. Now in Israel, I would say that it's very, you might know more than me. My son has a partner. He lives in Baca, which is kind of like the bubble of where modern Orthodox gay families, gay couples live. He's had his pride flag pulled down, egged, and a few other things, and they just keep putting them up, and somebody keeps vandalizing them. And we're all like in shock because he lives on this tiny little street. Like somebody has to be very determined to be doing this. And the rabbinic, it might be that down on the ground, people are, coming along, and because kids go to public school, the schools can't refuse to take them in. But the rabbis there, it's not so good. My son's experience in yeshiva was not great. So I'm just it's a little frightening to me. I will tell you, again, he has a partner. My husband and I love him a lot. Because my son's in Germany and I knew there was an alarm in Yerushalayim, I sent him a text saying, how are you? And I think he's not used to this idea that there's another Ima out there that cares about him. And he's like, oh, I'm fine. And then I said, I heard there was a whatever. He's like, it's like 3 hours until he answers me. And then finally, 3 hours after our last exchange, he's like, thank you for worrying about me. And I answered him, Kacha, I'm a mom. You're mine. What can I tell you? It's just, he's still grappling with that. But I'm just saying, as much as we have found our communities, and my son made it a decision, he was supposed to go to an Ivy League school here. He made a decision to give that up, and because he said he believed that he'd be able to live the religious life he wanted in Israel. It's not all rosy. I hope it will be. I'm sorry for being the downer, but it's not, and you have to be many of his friends have made the decision that they can no longer be religious. It's just too hard. Or Orthodox, I should say.
Do you have something to contribute, Rita?
Do we want to do the downer thing after the queer joy? But, okay, so for sort of a general picture. So for one thing, why is Israel kind of ahead of the game? Ben talked about it being small. Right, the rabbis were not here, but they were very much part of the story, right? The way that the activists engaged them was brilliant, and it was brilliant because it worked on many channels, right? So some of it was like above ground. Here we met with Rabbi or Rabbanit so-and-so. Here's a picture. Here's what we talked about. But so much of it happened patiently, right? Very, very patiently, very, very much behind the scenes. And because it's so small, because you can't get away, right? The story about, like, it's teaneck, but a little bit bigger, right? But everybody knows everybody, and people have access to their rabbis, and then it becomes very personal. So, and then the rabbi in the yeshuv, well, if they know something is happening in their yeshuv, they're going to have a Shabbat person come in. So that helps. On the downer side, I mean, it's become, well, I don't know, in that world that was before 10 days ago and then before 9 months ago when all the demonstrations began, I mean, that was the political hot potato, right? And sort of became a real dividing line within the Orthodox communities in Israel, right? More liberal, progressive, Baka, and the rest of the Jerusalem bubble, and Givat Shmuel, and the more conservative, right? This became the issue.
So I want to say that the evening is I think getting late, and I want to kind of allow everybody to move on to the rest of their evening. I think we'll take one more question after this, but I just want to say one thing about this, and that is that there's a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of work that's been done. And I think you're looking at the work that's been done, not at the work that needs to be done. We've interviewed at Eshel 262 pulpit Orthodox rabbis who had long conversations with us because we did not judge them for any of their positions. And we said to them, all we're trying to do is find out whether our people belong in your shul and in what ways might that be work and might it not. And the open conversation is shocking us how amazingly willing rabbis are to be honest about the difficulties and to talk with us. So I just want to say there's work to do. Shoval, if you want to contribute, is doing it. The Jerusalem Open House is doing it. And so is Eshel, and so is JQI here in the city. And there's a lot of work that needs to still be done. But this is a moment where we get to see the work that's already been done and how sweet and beautiful it is. One more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Hannah, and I'm tremendously privileged to know personally some of the people in that film. And I was messaging them right after it ended saying, I saw you, but also, how are you? So one thing that isn't quite talked about in this is that obviously for some of these couples, their children are from previous marriages within the mainstream, but I don't think it really necessarily shows just how much treasure it takes to bring a child into the world, especially as a queer couple. And one of the things I love about Israel that draws me closer to it every day is how family-focused the country is in so many progressive ways, well beyond this country here, and that the rules on who could even participate in Israeli-sponsored surrogacy have changed, but very, very, very recently. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, being connected just, to so many more queer couples in Israel than I am personally and have the capacity to be, do you foresee a baby glitter boom coming in the near future? And also, if so, do you think that there's going to be a force multiplier effect on just how accepting congregations have to become, especially in the religious community, because they're at risk of now losing a generation of children?
Just to provide some anecdotal evidence, Baca isn't the only place with a gayborhood. I lived in Arnona, and our WhatsApp group was called The Gaybers. And in that group, in the past year, let's say there is 18 of us, half of us are coupled up with someone else in the group, and from within that group, every couple except for one has had a child within the past 2 years. So a big part of why that happened was because of the Bennett-Lapid government, where for a long time the Israeli Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional and discriminatory that male same-sex couples didn't have access to surrogates in Israel. And so during that one candidacy, when that was finally open, there was kind of this broad feeling of like, okay, now or never, like get in. And so some people, are co-parents with somebody else. Some people, they had their own kids in that way. So I'll kind of start by just broadly saying I would be careful using terminology like more or less liberal, more or less conservative, because I would just call it kind of a different menu with a different set of things that come into it. Just as one example, before that was happening, it's hard to describe the nightmare that male parents were going through when their kid was born in Nepal during the earthquake. Right? I mean, that is a concept that I would imagine that most people in America who have a family member going through surrogacy aren't familiar with. So I would not call it better or worse. I would not call it more or less progressive. I would call it different and currently going through a big shift. Sorry, you had a second question?
I meant more progressive than here in America, where surrogacy is almost impossible to access.
Right. Yeah. They're very friendly with that, and the socialized medicine definitely helps. So.
There are some organizations here and in Israel, but we know some organizations here that are beginning to help LGBTQ couples make babies because they are committed to a future generation. And if they're going to be committed to straight couples finding avenues in order to produce children, why shouldn't they help us? And that is actually ongoing and growing. I just want to finish by saying that we are really grateful to the JCC for helping us screen this. We know that it actually really makes a difference. It makes a difference to the queer community because it makes us really feel hope. And it makes a difference to the allied community because it gives you a sense of the work that needs to be done and how important you are in getting it done. And we want to thank our panelists for coming this evening and for providing such a personal and warm and thoughtful presentation.